thank you all very, very much for being here, and thank you all for the work that you do on behalf of kids and the people who serve them. So that there's nothing more gratifying than thinking about and actually experiencing the collective effort and energy and good that you all bring into the world, no matter what role that you may serve or how many times you've been certified on a particular instrument. So, but thank you all very much. We're gonna talk a little bit about. I'm gonna summarize a little bit the top 10 minus 1 takeaways that I have from the research that we've done and others have done, and then John and I are going to talk a little bit about how that cascades into products. So the research starts with the premise that this is all about relationships, that the development of young people, the development of older people is embedded in these. So we are social beings. We are in a social environment, and it is those connections socially and relationally that fuel development. And anyone who's been a teacher or a student knows that that's where motivation comes, that's where learning is embedded in these connections that go back and forth. But relations they're complicated, so it's easy to say that theoretically, that relationships are important, but it gets very hard to start taking that and saying, well, what do you mean by relationships? And how would you actually study that scientifically? Because relationships are things like behaviors, and they're things like, I do something, you do something. We do something together. I think something about you, you think something about me. I have expectations for your behavior. You have expectations for my behavior. And then we have a memory of how we operate together. And all of that sits in this context of a family or a classroom or a culture. And all of that matters. So it could be very, very overwhelming, and I think oftentimes what happened, and certainly this was the case for us when we first started down the path of trying to figure out what goes on between teachers and kids relationally that matters for kids' development, it was like, where do you even start? So we basically started with behavior, because ultimately what I experience of you is what you do with me.
Yeah,
right? That's it. That's it. That's that's it. That's what I experience. And at some level, our premise was that that's what kids take out of this interaction. That's what's of value to them about a relationship. And that's what drives the expectations and the memories and all the kinds of things that kind of cascade and make that the complex but also very, very rich experience that we all have relationally, no matter what relationships we're in. And so we thought, okay, let's see if we can observe this. So we sat down in classrooms and started watching. And we started with some theory, and we said we think these three big buckets of things that adults do that provide emotional support and safety to kids. And there's things that adults do that kind of organize interaction in ways that keep kids' attention focused and paying and kind of organized. And then there are things that adults do with kids that expand their minds, that get them thinking and reasoning about the world with some level of depth. And then there's ways of looking at what teachers do that sort of you'd say, in those areas that say, wow, that looks like that's good. And there's other ways that look like that could use some improvement. And so that was the evolution of what became the class. And I think what we learned from that was that you can actually observe these behaviors. And once you can observe them, you can demonstrate their value for kids' learning and development. And that was really the key to then start saying, well, it's just not enough to observe them. You've got to do something about helping people get better. And we had this incredible experience very early on. I spent the better part of a year hanging out with preschool teachers in Charlottesville one year. And every week we'd get together, and it was while we were doing this work on developing the class, and one day, and they were letting us in their classrooms to observe them, and it was just wonderful partners. And one day, one of the teachers said, well, can I look at that manual and see what you guys are looking at? And I said, yeah, sure, that's fine, take a look at it. And they opened up the manual and they said, this is what we do. Somebody finally described what we do. This is professional development. And I hadn't even thought of it in those terms up to that point. We're just trying to figure out whether you could score it. And so then we had to think about how would you go about changing something as complicated as an adult's behavior with a kid in a classroom. You know, how would you go about changing that? And doing that in a way that was sensitive to the adult's perspective and not something like, here, John, here's 3 things to go do. Make sure you go do this in the classroom. You know, and I can guarantee that John, being the great guy that he is, and the very professional guy that he is, would go off and do those 3 things, right? But if those 3 things weren't embedded in a flow of meaning that was going back and forth between a teacher and a student, they just wouldn't mean the same, you know? So we started talking with teachers, and basically the number one problem teachers were telling us was like, it was like, there's too much information here. There's just, I stand in the front of the classroom or I'm with kids and all of this is flowing at me. And I don't know how to parse it. I don't know how to chunk it. I don't know how to interpret this behavior from this behavior from this behavior and its meaning. And I don't have a way of responding. So there was really it was pretty clear to us that there wasn't a language and a lens for thinking about and operating in the space that we call classrooms. You know, and when you think about that, you think about, wow, there's not a consistent language, there's not a lexicon, and there isn't a way of looking at behavior that allows me as an individual, but even more important, a system of a school district or a program to talk about things and know that they were talking about the same thing and they would understand the meaning of those words in a consistent way. So I had this time of being in groups of working with teachers and everybody would say, oh, sensitivity, really important. We all agree it's really important. And then we would say, okay, everybody give me your definition of sensitivity, or let's look at a videotape and see if we can find the sensitive behavior on the videotape. Everybody had 5 different definitions and pulled out all sorts of examples. So that it became really clear to us that a language and a lens, that clarity about practice was so important for being able to give teachers tools to be intentional. So, but without that clarity, what we saw were classrooms that were largely pretty passive, kids doing a lot of stuff, okay? And when the teacher engaged, it was often in reaction to what the kids were doing and not intentionally moving those kids in a direction and understanding how her behavior was contributing to that movement. So the language, the lens, the clarity of terms was really, really important. And the other thing that we felt was that we needed to create spaces that were safe for teachers to be able to engage, to share their practice, so the language and the lens helps, but also that when we engage teachers in improvement, it's done in such a way that's respectful of where they're starting from, that recognizes their assets, and also recognizes the importance that they have for relationship with others, whether it's peers or whether it's a coach. So building scaffolding systems around teachers that enable them to engage in practice and to see themselves and others doing the good work, okay, doing the work that one might score high on the class, but also helping them enter that space that was harder, you know, was looking at their own practice in ways that was critical and reflective, or be able to look at a partner's behavior in a way that could help them improve. So the lessons from that work were really about, you know, how do we take this complicated thing called classroom process and all the interactions that fall under a class or some other kind of framework and say, let's make this language clear. Let's provide labels and a lens for being able to see it clearly. Let's give people lots of examples. So if you looked at all of the PD that we developed and then tested, it almost always follows the same cadence. So a video library clip always has, this is an example of sensitivity. Sensitivity is important because, okay? And then describes why that dimension's important and what the instance is in that particular clip that shows an example of sensitivity. And I guess the other piece was let's make this bite-size nuggets for people to be able to digest, okay? So it's not a matter of watching 45 minutes of videotape and trying to figure out what's on the tape that's going well or not going well. It's seeing very, very clearly in a 35-second clip what really went well. And that specificity is really, really important in one of the learning. So one of the things that teachers would tell us is a theory about this, which is essentially there's so much information that's flooding at them in a classroom that they basically have cognitive overload, that there's just too much information to process. So to show a teacher a clip of 15 minutes of video and say, pick out on this video what's going well, contributes actually to that overload. And so enabling teachers to have the space to just say, I'm going to serve it up to you. Here's 35 seconds of an example of sensitivity. And this is what this teacher is doing in this clip that is an example of sensitivity. And then in coaching models, being able to do the same with a teacher's own behavior. So this language, this lens, this bite-sized chunk, this approaching teachers from a position of strengths and assets, were all markers of the kinds of, and principles of the kind of PD that we developed. And then the final piece would be, layering teachers with that PD in various degrees of intensity and digestibility for them, and doing so in such a way that cultivated a connection in their engagement over time with those resources. And lo and behold, I really, I am just struck by these findings, but every single time that we've done a study of any of that professional development, any of that kind of professional development support, teachers have improved significantly who've received it, which just tells me how professional our workforce is and willing to improve and willing to engage, how serious and important these relationships are to teachers and how motivated they are to get better. And if we provide teachers with any reasonable amount of support that's tailored to their needs, they're going to improve. They're going to get better, and the kids will benefit from that. So that's been our learning. We've learned from that, and I think what's exciting for me, particularly in partnership with Jon and folks, is to begin to think about how do you take those learnings, and make them as efficient and effective and impactful as possible to as many people as possible, not just in the US, but worldwide. This is really exciting, and it's Jon's job to figure that out. How's that? Okay. All right.
Well, I don't know
Lead us on, Jon.
if it's my job to figure it out, but I think that the company's work has always been grounded in this research. There's no question about that. And one of the reasons that I moved to Charlottesville and took this role was because of the research background that supports everything that we do. What I think is interesting and is where that research is pointing today. It's showing us some new indications. We're getting better at understanding what it means to provide professional development or learning in different forms to teachers from where we were even 5 years ago. And the exciting thing about this is that we're in a new world all of the time. And so 5 years ago, you couldn't deliver PD on a cell phone. Today you can. And those are things that are changing for us. And so when you put those together, I think that points us towards some new things. And we look at the products that are coming out today, and also some of the things we'll talk about that are in the future coming down the path. And I think that is a pointer about how to take somebody from one place to another in a relatively short amount of time, and also for the first time, I think, give them the appropriate recognition for the work that they do. This is something that we, in the past, have struggled to find. We had these formal systems of education that would grant degrees and so forth, but what we're seeing is the emergence of micro-credentialing and other kinds of improvement that can be measured and tracked, that lead to a professional career from wherever you start, and allow for us to recognize the performance of these amazing and gifted educators. So with that, I think we're going to talk about 3 big ideas, and we'll take each of those ideas and talk about how they translate into some of the real products that you can actually go and play with today.
Perfect.
So, Bob, let's start with one of these, common approaches and lexicon.
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about this, so I'm not going to belabor this point, but I think it matters that we understand the words that we use and that we have reference points for those. And I think our field in education has oftentimes finessed the words and not been clear about what we mean when we're talking about various ideas. And so it's been important for us to have this sense of there is a language and it's written in a very specific form, and you can see behaviors in your head when you read this language, and that's what cascades into all of the products.
Yeah, so taking that and applying that to what I'll describe as product themes, right? We have shared languages around effective implementations, intentional simplicity, approachability, and progressiveness, scaffolding, and seamless learning. And when I talk about seamless learning, it's the idea that you could start a learning in a face-to-face environment, move into an online one, and that it's wherever you happen to be that you can re-engage with that learning as you go. In this example that I'll show, it's actually, we talk about wanting to model the behavior of an educator and a student in the work of a coach and an educator. We're actually working to model the behavior of a coach and an educator in the experience of an organization. And so for that, we'll talk a little bit about the class journey. What we realized, and this happened through the years of working through this, we had a lot of products and people would struggle to understand those. And the language of the class, as you are new to it and familiarizing yourself with it, is a way of talking and thinking about the work. And we didn't want to add a lot of complexity to that. Yet over the years, as we built all of these products and services and we're offering them to the market, you had to understand these other things. MTP, MMCI, what do these things mean? So what we worked to do was create a story that describes the experience of most organizations as they work with the class as a tool. They start with the idea of establishing a baseline, they begin to develop proficiency through that, and then the capacity of the organization grows and they develop proficiency, which enables the organization to have what I would call as a kind of a virtuous cycle or a flywheel effect, where you now have the ongoing work that's being sustained by the experts that now reside within the organization. This was an experience that we had not described before in a discrete way. But what we wanted was a single way of talking about it, and so we developed the class journey to describe that. And so this common lexicon extends to the organization, and it transcends not only the class, but it also works with all of the roles that may be interacting with the class wherever they may be.
Well, and I think what this does is help us think about, again, to John's point, we think about an individual teacher's own journey, as in learning about their own interactions and evolving to a place in which they can use their own feedback of others and feedback that they can generate to become more proficient. This is really about talking about an organization's journey, and I realized, I had this great opportunity to talk to you guys from Boulder beforehand, who have been working with us, for 3 years, right? I think it was like 3 years, and I realized the different ways that I've talked to people and who have been working, with Teachstone or with class for some period of time, and there is a point at which there's really like a shift. It's like, now we own this thing, and we can use it to drive the kind of change that we want to make, more broadly in the district, or drive depth in the way that we engage in the learning with the individuals who are with us. And that kind of ownership is, I think, what we're all kind of striving for. And that we just didn't articulate it well at all. It was like, well, okay, just get trained to do observations and then we'll come in and plug you into some PD. And now it's just much more thoughtful, and I think can be really helpful in helping people understand where they are and where they're moving.
Mm-hmm. Well said. So let's look at another one of these. Here's another big idea: the processes and mechanisms of teacher skill acquisition.
So that was my academic speak for what are the kinds of tools that get developed, and why develop these tools that help teachers get better. And again, I think I talked about this a bit. As a teacher, I sat through an awful lot of professional development, 1-hour workshops that were largely irrelevant to what I was doing with these 6th graders in my middle school special ed class. And I think the ways that we begin to structure the inputs to teachers, and we talk about this all the time in looking at professional development, which is really to say, what is it about this thing that we're going to provide for these adults that we can draw a line to that will enable them to be changing their behavior with kids in the classroom in ways that are then going to change kids' learning. And it's no wonder that the vast majority of what we develop as professional development, the evidence is that basically that none of that works. that most of the PD that people are spending time and money on doesn't work because it hasn't been developed in a way that authentically connects to the practice of teachers, the language, the lens, the embeddedness of teachers, of what needs to be delivered to teachers in a real-time way that's contextual to the work that they're doing in that moment, in that setting. And I think that's a lot of where we're heading now.
So there's a lot there, and I'm not going to take the time to read all of these, but these are some of the ideas that we're working with as a product strategy team. When we sit down and we think about, how do teachers actually engage with the learning that we want to provide for them? What are the kinds of experiences that we want them to have? And there's several places where there's a lot of new kind of research going in. There's a research group at Castle right now doing work on nudge theory. That's something that we've looked at and are considering in some of the development of these products. We'll take a look at them. And also this, use the word bite-sized chunks, yeah. Right? I'm reminded of like a small candy bar, which maybe I'm a little hungry. But the idea is like this bite-sized learning with hooks. Hooks meaning you create some kind of relevance to the learning that ties it back to something that the learner can understand. There's a place where that fits in their own mental model. And their mental model is evolving to understand these new concepts as they take them in, and they're doing it in relatively small pieces. And so, one of the examples of this is our platform. And if you've been into our platform of late, what you've seen is that, first of all, we've merged our legacy platform, My Class, with our new platform, My Teachstone. It exists as a single platform now. And then also, we've begun to separate out the parts of that platform into tiles so that what you need to do is in the right place when you need to do it. So there's this beginning of an organization, or even perhaps a mental model for what your experience with the platform might be. If we go a level deeper, and these are some examples from some early prototypes that we've done in this. They exist today on the platform. You can go in and play with them. These are teacher pathways. When we set up the platform now, we create this ability to engage with the platform immediately. So yes, there's coaching models built into My Teachstone, but if we call these jumpstart modules, so you can get right in and as a teacher find relevant work to engage with on day one. These exist as PDFs. We're playing with them actually as learning objects, and we're also, with this actually iteration in the next couple of weeks, we'll be releasing the mobile-ready version of the platform, so you'll be able to go in with a mobile device and access all of this. And then, we have to recognize that many of our educators don't have access to digital resources either during the day, and sometimes not even at home in the evening. And so we haven't stopped thinking about what that looks like in the physical world. They spend most of their day working directly with children. So we've been building the new Teacher Primer product, and this includes a number of physical tools. First of all, talk about the strategy cards. And if you haven't played with these, go into the product lounge, take a look at them, open them up. But basically, they're organized by age level and time of day. And then I happen to have one here in my pocket around experiences during the day. So down here at the bottom, we've got a dimension. This is around teacher sensitivity. It's a time of transition for a toddler. And I'm just going to read it. When moving to a new activity, watch children closely. If a child doesn't seem to understand where to go, name the child's emotion and offer to hold hands as you walk to the next activity. Isn't that great? Are you feeling confused? So I'd say, Francine, can I take your hand? Are you feeling confused? Okay. We'll work on it. I'll come find you. The other thing I'll call out here is the dictionary. And again, if you haven't played with one of these, please go pick one up and take a look at it. But we've taken essentially, manual, really. I mean, and it's right here in a set of easy to use tabs and references, and down to. So we do talk about the domains and the dimensions, but when you get down to the indicators and the behavioral markers, instead, for the teacher, we talk about strategies and examples. And so we've taken the language and we've made it very relevant and very direct, right where they happen to be at the time they're there. And you can put one of these in your pocket and walk around with it during the day. So it's the idea of taking what we have and making it much more direct and relevant and immediate. And that doesn't, we would all say, well, where's the app for that? Certainly it could be an app, there's no question. But if you don't have an app, you can have these cards and they can be in your pocket. And I have a very young child at home. She's 6 weeks old. And I was thinking about this one. Smile at infants as you change their diapers. Be gentle as you move their bodies, and enthusiastically describe each step of the diapering routine. Isn't that great? It's just super relevant.
So I think just to add a coda to big idea number 2, one of the things that I think is what you just saw there is the beginning of the transformation that I think we have underway as an organization in moving from a place that does that helps people do observation into a place that really helps people authentically improve in contexts in which they are working with kids and with their peers. And that transformation happened as a consequence of engaging with you.
Absolutely.
And that's going to continue to happen and continue to be able to build tools that are helpful to people the more we hear from you and engage with you. And one of the things that I think we are hearing and we're seeing across the country, John really alluded to this earlier, which is this idea that, that the old, I say this as a dean of a school of education, the old 3-credit course and you put these, X number of these 3-credit courses together and you get a degree and we're going to mint you and think, hey, you're good to go now. Go off and teach all these kids, right? That works. That just isn't going to work, okay? It isn't going to work. We know it doesn't work. It doesn't work because, a lot of what we teach in higher ed isn't relevant to what goes on out in the class, in courses, in the field, excuse me. And that we know teachers need this support, scaffold, and doses appropriately over the long way. And we know that no matter how good we build these systems or these tools, we can have the best cards in the world, we can have mobile apps, we can have great coaching, we can help teachers get better all along the way, unless there's a system in which that work is embedded, that recognizes them as professionals, that rewards them as professionals, that certifies their competency as they move. then none of this is going to be worth it in the long haul. And so we're thinking a lot about that world ahead, which is probably going to be mostly connected online in some way, or a lot of this stuff is going to be delivered online. And then professionals will acquire competencies and credentials that maybe they stack them up into a course and a degree, or maybe not. Maybe they just are certified to be a really terrific teacher at X, right? And so that's the world we want to build into. That's the world we want to help shape and influence, because we think ultimately that world is going to be devoted to strengthening the capacity of those professionals to serve the kids that they're working with, rather than having them run off and spend a lot of time in work that may not be as relevant as what those kids that they're serving need. So systems of professional recognition and reward are really important to us, and we want to build into and help invent that world that's ahead. And we've started that most recently with the work that Jon and his team have done around the CDA.
So, the product themes here are around mobile and ubiquitous learning, just-in-time learning, competency-based learning, and all around an internal working model. Of course, the class is at the core of that, and if we can sort of embed that framework, that knowledge map in a way, early on in an educator's career, it's something that becomes a reference point throughout their career. So we want to go upstream. The work that I did before I came to teach Stone was I was the president of a coding boot camp. We had 6 locations. We took about 3,000 people in the time that I was there who had no knowledge of application development whatsoever, and we trained them as engineers, and they went out and got jobs. 95% of them had jobs within 19 weeks of graduating. And we see similar kinds of vocational and skill-based training opportunities that can be applied to this area. There's so much of a need for teachers. Virginia alone has a shortage. I think we have 1,000 teachers, and if you look at early childhood, the turnover is unbelievable. And so our opportunity is to look at some of these areas and move forward. And the thing for us that we've decided to focus on, and within our organization, if you haven't met Melissa King, she's here. Please take the time to meet her. She has been working now for almost a year to build what is becoming a CDA with class.
The CDA is just a fundamentally important credential for so many people in the field. How many of you engage with folks who either yourself have a CDA or engage with folks who have a CDA or do training with folks who have a CDA? So it's really, really important. It helps move us out into the spaces that so many kids are being served in. And so we had the opportunity to partner around the development essentially of a revamped CDA, and we're really delighted to be working with Valora Washington and her team and other folks to be able to figure out what are the key components of that, and how to bring in contemporary knowledge of child development, contemporary knowledge and skills of teacher-child interactions, and contemporary knowledge about how to work with kids around materials and activities in a setting to help foster their development.
So I'm at the moment logged into our learning management system, which is mobile capable, and I'm now into one of the modules of the CDA. And you can see whatever device that I'm connected with, I can see it. We have the transcripts of the videos here. There's key points and takeaways. It's a real learning module, and I'll just show you a little bit of this video.
Why is it important to nurture positive relationships with the children in your care? Children's relationships shape the way they see the world. Their relationships affect all areas of development. Consistent, healthy, nurturing relationships are essential for intellectual, physical, and social growth. Think about one of your positive relationships. When did this relationship begin? You probably noticed that it took time to grow this relationship. Building positive relationships takes time, commitment, and connection. The authors of Guiding Children's Social Development and Learning identify 5 key elements to establishing positive relationships with children: warmth, acceptance, genuineness, empathy, respect.
We couldn't build these products without you. We build them in response to you. And it's because of the relationship we have with you that we're able to continue this work and do this. I want to thank you very much for coming and being part of this. Please bring us your feedback. Help us to build better products so that we can support you better. And thank you for using the class.
Thanks, everybody. Hopefully, I hope what's happened here for you this afternoon is a glimpse into where we are in the present and moving very quickly into a future that, as Jon says, is based around your experiences, your needs, and the needs of the adults that you're working with to serve the kids in those settings. And so your partnership, your feedback is essential for us as we continue to evolve what we're doing here. And I think it's a pretty exciting future to support the work that you're doing. So thank you.